everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you this morning.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Very well, thank
Good.
you. We want to talk about a couple of things today. I might mention a little bit about the election coming up in the primary and who's going to be the Democratic nominee that's going to take on Trump. And I guess it's closer to that decision-making time. But also today, I want to mention the fact that the war evidently is not over in Iraq. We have, they claim it has winding down, but we still lose soldiers. And yesterday, I guess it was, we lost 2 Marines.
Yeah.
So the war continues, and even though the Iraqi parliament voted to get rid of us and leave, we didn't leave, we just stayed. So it's still a mess, and we want to visit with our viewers with that. But there was one article that caught my attention that I've mentioned this before because it annoys me. It's who's going to get the black vote. And everybody's stereotyped. Like, black people belong to this group, and they need all this help, and if they get stuff, then they're going to vote Democrat. But if the Republicans can point it out, well, maybe, it's always who can promise the most stuff, especially when you have Biden and Sanders running. I mean, neither one of them are offering more liberty and believing that they can be better off, with not more handouts and more special interests. You know, Walter Williams, a black economist, is a close friend, has talked a lot about this emphasis on color. And he always took it as a personal insult. Yeah. He says, I'm a grown-up individual. I don't need I don't need a black leader to tell me what to do. He was very credible, but he wouldn't be liked by, a lot of people, now in the civil rights movement. But this, I think, is something that people don't understand. I had this come up, and I've mentioned this before, is that at one time my congressional district was basically all rural, almost all. And then all of a sudden they changed and they moved me along the coast, and it became more dominantly manufacturing, oil industry, and city workers. And I can remember, and this annoyed me, the reporters would come up, well, how are you going to handle this? What are you going to do? Now that you just used to appeal to farmers, how are you going to appeal to industrial workers? Of course, this just blows my mind because I see that free markets and civil liberties and less war, it helps everybody, and you don't have to even check. And that's sort of what continues to go on because of these organizations. Now, Rohana, who was a co-chairman for Sanders, he said because Sanders' group is right now worried about getting enough black vote, and that's the whole thing, and they have to change their strategy. So Rohana said, what you need to do is you need to work much closer to the Black Caucus in the Congress. Once again, emphasizing, lobbying groups. It's a lobbying group. Yeah. So if you have lobbying groups for the military-industrial complex, people get annoyed about that. So they're claiming that that the people they should work more with them. But the whole thing is, I always thought in terms of there's a contest going on, and minorities have been discriminated against. But this whole idea is completely different on removing government obstacles. Yeah. Affirmative action and slavery all the way down that they got in the way, of small groups. But once that is out of the way in the discussion, what they have to say is, this is what I wish they would say, who's going to offer me the most liberty? Yeah. But that is not in there at all. It's always, right now, and I think you've seen this with Biden and Sanders, they go, how are we going to get this vote? So it's so far removed from you know, if they really want to talk about eliminating frictions between groups, they shouldn't even talk that. And the way Walter Williams put it, he says he always thought it was sort of degrading.
Yeah.
You know, well, we can't do it on our own, so we have to do this. And it isn't just current events. It's, well, we have to deal this in racial groups and talk about repatriation and go down hundreds of years ago and try to iron all this out. To me and to libertarians, that's sort of removed from the idea we have problems and we're in a political system, but the issue should be authoritarianism versus liberty, but they don't talk about that much, and I think that's what's going on here. I don't think if you were compelled to pick between Biden and Sanders and who provided the most liberty, you know, you could make a case for either side, and neither would be right.
Yeah.
Neither would be worth anything.
Yeah. You know, it's funny, in an age where everyone is insulted by things, everyone is offended by things, it's surprising that no one's offended by the term the black vote, you know, as if it's some monolith. It sounds offensive, but a little bit more on election. Today is Super Tuesday the 2nd, which Joe Biden might call Super Thursday the 2nd. But we've got 352 delegates that are going to be decided today: Michigan, Washington, Missouri, Mississippi, Idaho, and North Dakota. The key, I think, will be Michigan with 125 delegates, and Sanders won it last time. Remember, he shocked Hillary and won there and kind of breathed some new life into his campaign. The polling right now favors Biden, and we know the fix is in because, you know, there was this timed withdrawal of candidates just to boost him before Super Tuesday won. I think the big question, Dr. Paul, is, and someone else has asked this, will Tulsi stick with it? Because everyone's pretending she doesn't exist. If Biden wins big in Michigan, it's going to be hard for Sanders to justify staying in the race. There's going to be a lot of pressure from the party to pull out for unity, and he's shown in the past that he's very flexible when it comes to that. So if that is the case and Tulsi stays in, she can run a lean and mean campaign. What are they going to do if she gets a lot of Bernie voters, which I think she will, and she's up to 20 or 30% in the polls? How are they going to say, you can't debate, you can't be part of this? You know, it's going to be very awkward. So part of me really hopes she sticks it out, you know, and goes after those Bernie voters.
You know, this obsession with democracy, you know, and they use the word poorly. So they were talking about the democracy, and they had 6 or 7 people, and they were shrinking the number of people running, and they really put pressure on 2 or 3 or 4. You got to drop out.
Yeah.
You got to drop out. You can't run. What do you think this is, a democracy? And they get to vote on that. So I think that's sort of ironic, and that is the case right now. You know, they don't want the competition. Certainly, Tulsi, isn't it a bit ironic that even though her position on economic policies are, you know, quite different than ours, but you know, a good, honest progressive or reasonable people. You know, and so she has some good instincts on civil liberties and certainly on foreign policy. And yet they work very hard to exclude her. They can't
erase her.
They can't stand the idea that this might be sorted out through the democratic process. We run this show, and we don't want anybody interfering with it.
Who do you think you are?
Okay, why don't we, do you have anything more on the election?
No, let's go on to Iraq. It's part of it, I think.
Okay, we'll talk a little bit about Iraq because of this incident. It seems minor, but it's still significant. Two Marines got killed. They sit in a combat zone, don't know all the details. After Soleimani was killed, assassinated by our government, who was Iranian, the Iraqis just decided they don't like us so much anymore, and a lot of Iraqis never did. You know, they want their country back again. So they, when they did that, the Soleimani, you know, has incited a lot of people. So a lot of Iraqis, they voted in their parliament. You guys should leave. We're tired of you. But of course, we're not going to leave. We're not going to leave Afghanistan, and we're not going to leave Syria, not for a while yet. Not that Trump is any worse. Matter of fact, he could be a little bit better than Obama. Obama was so aggressive with warmongering. But it's so far removed from the basic principle trying having a pro-American foreign policy, and that's of course what a libertarian policy would be. It wouldn't be designed for pick and choose and running the world, and we wouldn't have an empire, and we wouldn't be badgering people and putting on sanctions on everybody, all that nonsense that is provoking a lot of people and hostility toward us. And the poorer we get, the more hostility there's going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And this incident we're talking about happened yesterday. And of course, the U.S. Marines, the Special Forces of U.S. Marines, were in a joint mission with Special Iraqi Forces. And this is interesting because I think there's a lot more to this than meets the eye. I just sense it. And we've read quite a few articles from different sources about it. And I don't think we're getting the full story, and I'm sure we won't necessarily. But this is a region of Iraq that really is a battleground between Iraqi Kurds and Iraqi Arabs in the first place. Ostensibly, the mission was to clear out these caves that were used by ISIS. So 2 U.S. troops were killed, 4 were wounded. It took about 6 hours to recover the bodies. Apparently they fell into some crevices. But you wonder, as you point out, 5,200 American troops still remain in Iraq. And this is after the Iraqi parliament did vote to expel U.S. troops. And then Prime Minister Mahdi said, you guys need to leave. And Pompeo said, what are you talking about? We're not leaving. These operations, these joint operations were suspended for about a month after the Soleimani assassination. Now they've obviously been ramped back up. But the question, I think, really is about the Soleimani killing and what it's done to these troops. You said, worry about the troops, concerned about the troops. After this assassination and after the vote to expel U.S. troops, which was extremely popular among Iraqis, we keep our troops there in an atmosphere that is much more hostile toward them. They are more at risk because of this decision, apparently hatched up in the mind of John Bolton to assassinate Soleimani. So it really talk about protecting the troops. Trump likes to go out there with the flags and talk about the troops. Well, he put the troops in a lot more danger.
Yeah, that's right. Now, the anti-war article that was on the net this morning, the title of it suggests the concern. U.S. reviewing Iraq operations after 2 soldiers killed. They're reviewing it. Once again, what did we go wrong?
Yeah.
They're missing the whole point, of course. When you're in war, but you're not in war, and people get killed, and you never know whose side people are on, this is what happens. So we know what the solution to that confusion is. But this little article I thought had an interesting sentence. It said, this may suggest that the U.S. is not going to be so deeply engaged in the fight going forward, which likely will suit Iraq just fine. And but who is Iraq? The people aren't Iraq. It's the leadership and the deep state and who's angling for controlling Iraq. Well, if it would suit Iraq just fine, my little thought was, and me also. I would be quite happy with that. But the whole point that people who think about these problems should realize that it isn't strategy, it isn't a tactical problem, it isn't poor military management. It's sort of like endless criticism of the Fed. Well, they shouldn't have raised the interest rate 2 points, they should raise it 1 point. This idea. Because instead of saying, well, there's something wrong with managing the money supply and interest rate. And that's what they're in. They're involved in something. We're in a mess over there. How many countries now? We really just never pick up and leave. And of course, non-intervention means non-intervention. And when things aren't going well in a country, they're going to have to solve their own problems. That we can't be involved and say, well, what we really need to do is get back into nation building. The nation building went on for all those years, trillions of dollars being spent. That didn't work. And many, many people died. And of course, we never count the collateral damage and the civilians that died. But it's a totally fruitless operation. And this in a way looks like a small incident, but it's still very symbolic of what's going on. This kind of stuff is going on. The reassessment. hopefully it'll help, but they're not going to reassess it and call us up and say, hey, what do you guys think? How are we going to solve it so it doesn't happen anymore? Well, you know, who knows? There could people there who despise what we're doing there. Someday they may blow up a building and have a real disaster, kill a lot more than 2 American soldiers.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, I wish we could be optimistic, saying that they might have this review might result in us doing less. But, you know, this is the military and the mindset in Washington. You keep doing the same thing over and over again and expect different results. Here's what the U.S. military spokesman said after the deaths of these 2 Americans. We continue to support our Iraqi security force partners, you know. So it's just like, you know, nothing has changed, nothing has happened. But, you know, they wrap this whole thing up in the package of fighting ISIS, because they've created this bogeyman called ISIS to scare the heck out of everyone. Remember back to 2014 when we started this. And so they can trot this thing out whenever they want. It's sort of like ISIS is the gift that keeps on giving, in a way. It makes you scratch your head. Here's the New York Times writing about the event where these 2 Marines were killed. ISIS has been spending its last few months reconstituting its ranks. You know, here they come back again. So don't you dare, when you have this review, you can't have, there's one conclusion you're not allowed to have, which is that we need to pull out.
You know, if we went in there by making an honest mistake, that would be one thing. But how many lies were told? They knew exactly what they were doing. They knew they had to lie and get the people all jazzed up to go to war. But just stop and think for a minute. What if we had not done that? What if they had listened to, there was an anti-war movement going on here. What if they had listened to us in the anti-war movement and it was just canceled? No war. Saddam Hussein is not Al-Qaeda. We don't need to go there. And we lied about this. The truth is we lied about Al-Qaeda being in Iraq. So can you imagine what would have been saved in life and limb and finances, trillions of dollars, thousands of lives, a lot of Americans, and I don't think people ever even realize, you know, if we lose 2,000 or 3,000 military people, how many people back home, wives and husbands, and people that come home and they've been injured and they suffer a lifetime on this, and it has to be huge. But people don't respond to that. They'll say, oh yeah, there's a consensus now. We shouldn't have gone in there. As a matter of fact, Trump used that in his campaign.
Yeah, big time. Yeah.
He used it, and the people listened, and home, get them home and stay out of there. I mean, what have we accomplished even when we have reduced it? The answer that we would get from that is, oh, you guys are so sympathetic to Saddam Hussein. He was such a nice guy, and you want to keep him in office. But it wasn't our business to decide whether he should be disposed or not. And besides, even in the very pragmatic sense, what I'm talking about, how many people died and how much money was spent, wouldn't have happened if Saddam Hussein had been in power. Yes, he would have been a bad guy, but every once in a while we get some bad guys in our government too. But we don't expect them to come from outsiders. There's a few right now that hate so much our president, they'd probably be willing to have some outsiders come in. They probably did, in Russiagate and some other things. Yeah. They were having outsiders trying to undermine our government. So it's a pity, but the comparison it just goes by them. And that we're just too soft on these bad guys.
And here's the real reason why we will not just bring them home, and that reason is simple. It's Iran. Because if the U.S. is not there fighting ISIS, which we would be very suspicious of anyway, who hates ISIS more than anyone in the region? Well, it's Iran. It's the Iranians. It's the Iranian militia. So if we pull out, the Iranians are going to finish a job in Iraq, and that'll give them more influence. Well, it's kind of late to think about that and worry about that. Maybe you should have done that back in 2002 when you decided to invade and destroy Iraq, So that's the real reason we can't let them have the fruits of our mistakes. But I'm going to finish with 2 things. One, this is interesting. I came across this, Dr. Paul. Remember Brett McGurk? He was a former U.S. Special Envoy for the coalition to defeat ISIS. He's the gentleman that we had on tape a few days ago telling the truth about Idlib, which is the largest al-Qaeda concentration that's left there. Well, he tweeted out yesterday after the killing of these 2 troops. He's also telling a little bit of truth here. It's always the case when you get out of government, you actually start telling the truth. Here's what he said. we seem to have lost focus on this mission, the Iraq mission, while increasing risks to our people and depleting their resources for no good reason. So there, he nailed it. He nailed it again. So, and I would just close finally by reminding everyone to get your tickets to join us in Houston in May. It's coming up in the spring. Cancel culture and the war on speech. We're going to all be looking like that, screaming at each other. No, just kidding. May 23rd, 2020 in Houston. Go to ronpaulinstitute.org/conference for more details and to get your tickets. Dr. Paul, we're getting close to being halfway sold out with a couple of months to go. So people that don't get their tickets right away, I'm afraid, are going to have to be turned away.
Very good. And I want to thank our viewers, of course, for tuning in today. And we went over this update on Iraq and tried to point out, though it's small, it's still significant. And they're looking for a solution to have better management of our forces there so incidents like this wouldn't occur. And of course, our answer is very, very clear. It's not confusing and it's not hard to understand. And that is just get out of there. Because as long as we're occupying the country, there's going to be a lot of hatred. And there's a lot of hatred toward us, more so after we assassinated Soleimani. And this continues. And this whole idea that you can manage an unmanageable foreign policy is what the problem is, that we're going to manage an empire and we're going to do it with ambivalence and change in policy all the time and say, well, we don't want troops on the ground. Yeah, we still put troops on the ground, but it's a lot different than Vietnam. But it's there. I think it's a much, hot cake of violence there is going to be getting worse rather than better. It's just not going to go away because the policy is wrong. And the policy is not a pro-American policy. This is not good for America. It's not good for our defense and our security. It's not good for our finances. And it's not good for trying to develop a friendship with other people. That should be a goal in life, even with people who aren't perfect. Because, like I said, I've met a few people in Washington are far from perfect. And yet we still try to work with people. But this whole idea that we have to assassinate the people that we don't like, all the way back to Vietnam, assassinate leaders that we didn't like, just aggravating, making things worse. So the old argument from us is, this have non-intervention, this have a policy designed for the protection of the United States and security, and the world would be a bit better off, but that change can come better once the bankruptcy continues to evolve, because we're seeing the early stages of what's happening in a bankruptcy, that people don't know what to do with their money and they put it into 10-year treasury bills and take interest rates down to 0.7%. So there's big problems going on financially, and there's a lot of money out there but not doing the thing most people think it should be doing. It's only occupying a lot of bankers and special interests in government ideas. Anyway, I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.